The movie Together.
Son? How about Gogeta?
Let's talk about it. Hey, great to have you here. As mentioned, today I'll be reviewing the recently released body horror movie Together. As a reminder, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please consider doing so and joining this community. And for my review here, I'll cover some light spoilers, but won't discuss the ending in detail. As for the overall synopsis for this movie, we have Franco and Alison Brie play this couple who are moving to a remote town for a job that Alison's character, Millie, is taking as a school teacher. Franco's character, named Tim, seems to be a little bit of a floater professionally. He plays guitar, but mostly defines himself by his relationship with Millie, and this is pretty much emphasized by the line that Millie's brother gives early on in the movie, where he points out that Tim's last memories, when his life flashes before his eyes, are going to be of Millie's memories, so pretty much pointing out that his identity is tied to Millie. So once at their new home and settling in, Tim and Millie wind up going hiking, then fall in this pit that we see in the movie's brief introduction scene. They wind up deciding to spend the night down there, and then ultimately drink the water, which that choice winds up being this movie's inciting event. After they eventually head home, Tim starts to feel a little bit weird, and eventually both him and Millie start to spiral downward as they're confused about what's happening to their bodies. And for the most part, we only have one other relevant character here, this teacher who works at Millie's school and lives down the street from them, named Jamie. And in time, we also learn that his character knows more than he's letting on. Looking at some of the pros and cons for this movie, starting off with the pros, the first one being, I'm not a real big body horror fan, but the visuals they used here worked very effectively. The fusing of limbs in multiple scenes here gave that uneasiness and tension for what's coming next. And for those that read any horror manga from creators like Junji Ito, it reminded me of things like Uzumaki, with the creepy body horror contorting and fusing. Second pro I had for this film, the simplicity of the story worked for me. It reminded me a bit of Heretic, where we get this intense journey, but only with a handful of characters to manage, so we can really dive deep into their stories. And then third pro I'll point out for the film, while I won't go into details, they gave us a definitive conclusion here. These types of movies can sometimes end with you making your own interpretation, but we had a clear end here, albeit I'll say it was a little bit predictable coming into the movie. Now looking at some of the cons I had for the film, the first one being the inciting event that I mentioned with falling into this pit had decisions that weren't really believable to me, but thankfully the story doesn't overly rely on this moment. But taking a look at that scene, first of all, there's no way I would have slept down there. And for me to believe that they actually would have chosen to do so, I wish they would have shown them at least trying in some ways to get out at one point and then realizing, oh, let's wait till the morning. And then second poor decision, there's no way I would have even considered drinking the water down there, especially within such a small amount of time. My first assumption would have been, hey, there's probably some bacteria in there, so definitely don't touch any of that. And then we also see a creature down there later on in the movie, but that whole initial night, there's no creature whatsoever. And on a separate tangent, I'm really wondering, how has this creature survived thus far, drinking only water at most? I don't know if we want to say the magical powers of this water kept them alive. There's also a few other small issues I had with that scene, like when he's trying to use his phone as a compass and now look at the GPS. Normally when you look at that, even if you don't know where you are, you would see a green forest area where you're standing, and then roads on your GPS, and decide, okay, I'm going to travel to that direction because that's where I know civilization is. So that probably would have been my first move, but I realized that's a little bit smaller of a nitpick compared to the staying in there overnight and then the water drinking. Second con I'll point out for the film, slight spoiler here, but the coworker Jamie being in on things seemed pretty obvious based on his behaviors in some of the earlier scenes, which this movie doesn't overly have to rely on twists to be successful, so it wasn't the biggest negative for this subgenre. And then my third con for this film, the scene in the school bathroom made no sense to me. We were led to believe because Tim and Millie hadn't been intimate in such a long amount of time, she would just decide, yeah, sure, let's hook up at my new job's location in this kid's bathroom of this school without locking any doors where anyone could just ultimately walk in. It didn't even really align to her character and how she acted in the scene prior, where she sees Tim outside her window at the school and then aggressively runs out there to grab him and pull him aside. It also felt a little bit unbelievable in today's day and age that he could just walk into a school parking lot where this kid's outside of recess or whatever, and nobody else stops him at any point. But that wraps up some of the pros and cons out of the film. Now jumping into some sub-scores. So the first one being with the plot, I'll give this one a 3 out of 5. As mentioned, it was somewhat of a simple story of a couple together, which metaphorically served as the extreme end of codependence in a relationship. And then next up for an entertainment score, I'll also give this one a 3 out of 5. I was pulled into this world of these characters, and I was intrigued where things would head and what sick and twisted visuals we would get next. And then next up, speaking of twisted visuals, for a gore score, I'll also go with a 3 out of 5 here. This movie is more body horror than gore per se, but there are some bloody scenes here, like where our characters force separation from each other. For a scare score with this one, I'll say 4 out of 5. This movie had a few more jump scares than I expected, but they worked well and gave you some pretty shocking effects at the same time. And then for a rewatchability score, this one I'm gonna go a little bit lower and say 2 out of 5. Once you see some of the body horror and scares, you know to expect them and already know where the story goes. On top of that, I did start to question more and more of the logic used as I reflected on the movie over a longer period of time. So now for an overall score for Together, I'm gonna go with a 6 out of 10. It's an above average film, and recency bias has me want to say 7 out of 10, but I think given time, it'll lean closer to a 6. But considering that body horror isn't my go-to horror subgenre, this performed exceptionally well. It does have some flaws, and isn't the most innovative story, but it used some pretty creative visual effects that gave the movie an eerie and uneasy vibe. But those were my thoughts on Together. If you've seen it, what'd you think? What parts did you like or dislike? Let me know your thoughts on all things Together down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to talk to you again soon.